That's good.
Good evening, everyone. Before our meeting actually begins, we'll have an invocation offered by Commissioner Waddington, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
God our Father, as we gather for this meeting this evening, give us guidance and wisdom to make the proper decisions. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hayberger, will you be calling the roll tonight?
Yes, that's my understanding. I'll be taking over.
If you would call the roll.
Mr. Waddington?
Here?
Mr. Brady?
Here.
Ms. Twine?
Here.
Mr. Murray?
Here.
Mr. Poole?
Here.
Ms. Lloyd?
Here.
Mr. Lockhart?
Here.
Commissioners, you have before you the minutes of our meeting. I believe they've been distributed, of May 13, 2019. What is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Waddington.
I move that we accept the minutes of the May 13th meeting and dispense with the formal reading.
Second.
Got a motion and second discussion. Absent objection, the motion be approved. And hearing no objection, the motion is approved. We turn now to audience participation. Anyone wishing to address the commission on any of our agenda items tonight, please step to the microphone, give us your name and address, and share with us any thoughts that you may have. Seeing no one rush to the podium. Before we get to that, I need a motion to accept the communications. I did want to explain, Mr. Waddington, that the weather finally cleared yesterday, and I was able to get to a bush that did not make it through the winter. The bush fought back, though, pretty violently, and I ended up being scratched in my face. As you can see that's what that is. I'm really embarrassed, though, because it was a butterfly bush.
Oh, boy.
But so you've made Sandusky a butterfly city, and so the butterflies are winning. I do want to report that. Also, I wanted to note this was really cool. So Senator Brown was in town today, wanted to find out what was going on in Sandusky because he's been reading about it and had noted that things have changed very much for the better here. And so on the very day that he was here to visit, this is what the front page of the Plain Dealer looked like today. It says, for those of you who can't see, it's remaking a 200-year-old city, and there's a picture of the city hall that we're going to move into next year. Or next, boy, Freudian slip. Next month, so all of Cleveland is looking at that today, and everyone in this room and everyone in this building is rightfully proud and has contributed to that, so that's a great thing. And finally, I do want to mention, before we get going, there was a little kerfuffle over the weekend about Bike Week, and we always have these. They come up every year. And let me just say that I think it teaches us a lesson in a couple of ways. One, we're a big town. We're a grown-up town, and there's lots of room for different people to explore what it is they want to do in this town. It's only a week to 10 days, and I think that, I'm not a big fan of Bike Week. It's not my thing. I don't have a bike, don't get down there. I do visit, it's colorful and interesting, but I don't like lima beans either, okay? And we're not going to outlaw lima beans, and we need to be tolerant of each other and make room for each other within this community. I'll probably catch a lot of flack for that statement, but be that as it may, that's what the sign of a grown-up community is. We make room and allowances for each other. If we have issues, we come to the table like adults, and we resolve them like adults. I think the other lesson that maybe is lost on this group here and watching at home, emotions don't really belong on Facebook or social media. Those are to be expressed one-on-one. Just my unsolicited advice. If you have emotions other than joy and pride, keep them to yourself. If you've got those, put them on social media. That's a good place for them. But it all died down. I think it's just a good lesson for all of us. So hopefully that's behind us. All right, we have several communications from staff recommending various pieces of legislation. Would someone care to make a motion to accept those?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second discussion. Without objection, the motion be approved. And hearing no objection, the motion is approved. Commissioners, we have several items on the consent agenda. Are there any of those that you would like to have placed on the regular agenda? If not, then Mr. Hayberger, would you present the consent agenda, please?
Item A is an appropriation amendment number 1 to the general appropriations ordinance. Item B is a resolution authorizing submissions of various applications for environmental and regulatory permits for Sandusky Bay Initiative projects. Item C is acceptance of 4 parcels through the city's land bank program. Item D is the purchase and sale agreement for parcels located at 1413 Huntington Ave through the city's land bank program. And item E is a purchase and sale agreement for parcel located at 823 3rd Street.
Thank you, Mr. Haber. Commissioners, having heard the consent agenda, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Lloyd?
I move that we accept the consent agenda and declaring that all ordinances and/or resolutions A through E as drafted and presented to the City Commission under the consent agenda shall take effect in accordance with the section reflected in the ordinances and/or resolutions A through E, whether it be in accordance with Section 13 or 14 of the City Charter.
Second.
Being a motion and second, comments, debate? If not, then, Mr. Haber, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
And now on the ordinances and resolutions, please.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Those resolutions and ordinances are adopted. Mr. Haber, would you present item number 1, please?
It is, item number 1 is an ordinance be passed vacating an alley located north of Cleveland Road between 1625 and 1632 Cleveland Road within the city as set forth on the vacation plat, and a copy of which is marked Exhibit A2 attached to the ordinance and incorporated herein.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, which is on the second reading, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Twine?
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under the second reading.
Second.
Been a motion and second. Discussion. Mr. Haber, would you poll the commissioners on the ordinance, please?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
That ordinance is adopted. Item number 2, please, Mr. Haber.
Item number 2 is an ordinance be passed amending Part 7, the Business Regulation Code, Chapter 735 for public vendors of the codified ordinance of the City of Sandusky in the manner and way specified below.
Commissioners, this is back to us for a second reading after having been amended at the last meeting. What is your pleasure?
Chairman,
Cool.
move for adoption of this ordinance under second reading.
Second.
Been a motion and second. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Lloyd?
I'll be abstaining. Looking at the legislation, many of the areas that looks like they'll be recommending for vending licensing is right next to one of my businesses.
Further comments or discussion? Mr. Haber, would you poll the commissioners on the ordinance, please?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Abstain.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
That ordinance is adopted. Item number 3, please.
Item number 3 is an ordinance be passed authorizing and directing the city manager to accept an entitlement grant in the amount of $721,669 total to the Community Development Block Grant funds for the program year of July 1st, 2019 through June 30th, 2020, and to submit to the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development a 5-year consolidated plan containing a 1-year action plan, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Waddington?
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the City Charter.
Second.
Been a motion and second. Discussion. So Ms. Blanca is here. Thank you for the presentation that we've had in prior meetings regarding this. Just wanted to note that to the commission in case there were any additional questions that they might have of you or any other staff members or comments. If not, then Mr. Hayberger, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes,
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
that ordinance is adopted. Item number 4, please.
I guess first we should have a motion to accept this fiscal officer certificate. I assume that's separate than the ordinance, is that correct?
Okay, so there's a request for a motion to accept that certificate.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
I make the motion to accept the fiscal officer certificate under ordinance, in item 4 under the ordinance section.
Second.
then a motion and second. Discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Poole.
just a question. What are we accepting? Are we just accepting that he presented it and say thank you? Or are we saying that we've gone over all the things, that we know what he knows and that it's accurate?
I'll defer to these gentlemen to answer. I believe that we are acknowledging the receipt. I don't,
that
we're not
correct?
vouching.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Further questions or comments on the motion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And,
So then we're still on item 4 then.
correct.
Okay, so I'll read that aloud.
If you would, please.
Item 4 is an ordinance be passed providing for the issuance and sale of urban renewal temporary revenue bonds, the maximum principal amount of $4,700,000 in anticipation of the issuance of definitive urban renewal revenue bonds for the purpose of paying costs of the city urban renewal project activities in the second urban renewal plan area and declaring an emergency.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Brady.
move for the adoption of this ordinance under Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and second. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Poole.
just a few questions. We are borrowing money, at what rate is it that we're borrowing money?
Mr. Soloway, are you able to address that question? Since it's in the future, that will be set by the market, as I understand it.
That's correct, and I can advise commission once we sell these what the interest rate ends up being.
But we are in a very stable to declining rate environment,
Correct.
Which isn't great for savers, but it's okay if we're borrowing money.
Correct, and this will just be a one-year note, and then we would intend to issue the bonds next year, long-term.
Okay, then, and again, my ignorance. It says the rate's estimated at 6.5%, that's why I couldn't understand how. Is it 6.5% or not? Payable on June 1st?
No, you can never set an interest rate until you actually go to the market to sell your bonds. So obviously, if a commission doesn't pass this, there's no interest rate that's binding. You'd have to actually go to the market to set the interest rate. I think a lot of the language in the ordinance is either not to exceed or estimated. For ordinance purposes, it's not, there's no binding interest rate that's being approved tonight. It's basically approving us to go market these.
Essentially, then, we are authorizing you to get at least to pay 6.5% if the market comes to that.
Yeah, and I highly doubt it would get to that high. We've not sold anything that high since I've been here, so, but yeah, the authorization is basically on the, selling the $4.7 million.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr.
Let me suggest that we're in the best economic times we've ever been, and interest rates are low. I have a problem with authorizing 6.5%, if realistically it should be significantly less. And if the taxpayers end up paying 6.5% a year on this $4 million, it's something that we should have discussed and planned well in advance. Somebody just needs to make me feel comfortable. What's the cost benefit analysis look like for this, on this project? Urban renewal is the intention of taking dilapidated old buildings or what have you in an area and paying it off incrementally, which is the TIF fund, with the concept of the property values going up. We're gonna have costs going into this, and how much, when you did your analysis, where do we stand? If we come in paying 6.5%, how long does it take us to see any benefit from this, and what is the benefit?
So our analysis would have run our projections between like a 2 and 4% range on interest expense. We probably would not approve anything at 6%. And our approval, again, tonight is to go to the market to approve the borrowing for the 4.7 million for the Jackson Street Pier project and the Shoreline Drive project, so.
So let me ask you this, where are, with the rating that our city has, given rates today, what is the rate that you expect or last paid on a one-year note?
I believe last year was around 2%.
Okay. And this year, it can't be significantly different from that, is it?
No, it should not be.
Okay, so I think Mr. Poole is pointing to the fact that have kind of a belt and suspenders here and probably a little bit more latitude than is necessary in the legislation. It seems to me that it would make sense to put a tighter parameter on that. And so, Mr. Poole, I don't know if that's a way to address the concern that you have. If we put a cap, you said last year was 3%? So if we put a cap of 3.5 instead of 6.5, would that add to your comfort level?
Yeah, that would add to the comfort level. That would certainly do that.
Would you care to make that a motion?
Perhaps I have some other questions.
Understood.
These bonds, who can buy these bonds?
So,
Who, as in the offering?
we use a financial advisor that'll market these to different investors, and we're still debating if we're gonna go to market or do what's called a private placement, which is how we sold the prior bonds that are on this, where you negotiate these things with a specific investor. Since these are not general obligation backed, these are revenue backed, which is a little bit different than one-year notes that we issue in the fall. So, I hope that answers that question.
What controls that decision in terms of whether this goes to market, which means anyone can buy, as opposed to, I presume, I'm not sure, in section,
We would rely on bond counsel and our financial advisor to see if there's interest in that, to sell them in an open market. And we may attempt to sell them in an open market, and then if it doesn't work out, we would seek to do a private placement with a firm, probably similar to the one that we would have used last time, which I think was BB&T Bank.
what would be the reason that you couldn't sell them on the open market?
Well, it could be a variety of reasons, just interest. The amount's not super high. Sometimes it's hard to get investors interested in buying a small piece. What we've been trying to tell people is this is basically a one-year note with the intent to issue bonds next year, and the bonds would mature when the TIF would expire. So we're looking to try to find somebody that's interested in these, long-term. So the draw would be that we will be selling long-term bonds next year.
How much? How many? How much money are we talking about? We started here at 4 point.
Yeah, so what the plan right now is we're issuing the 4.7 million this year. We'll pay down about 1.2 million next year. And then, as you recall, we committed 1.3 million for the Fike Building project, and then $500,000 for the Cook Building project. So we will add those two pieces next year. And that the remaining portion on the Jackson Street Pier and Shoreline Drive would be about 3.9 million. So ultimately, next year we would look to bond out about 9.2 million in principal amount.
This covers Jackson Street Pier, Shoreline Drive, all for 9 million, and all those other
The
projects
Fike Building
for
and
$9
Cook
million.
Building. Yes. And basically, you're using the proceeds from the TIF to pay the debt.
Okay. Each of those projects is significantly more. Where's the money come for the balance of the money for those projects?
I would defer to what the legislation that was previously passed for both of those projects. I believe they're outlined in those communications that has been previously passed by commission, so.
Okay. Which one of you does that? Has that?
You're referring, Mr. Poole, I want to make sure I understand, you're not referring to Cook or Fike, because those are just, we have a piece of that. You're referring to Shoreline Drive and Jack Street Pier?
I'm referring to how much debt we're gonna have overall when this is done. We've walked through these projects singularly, one at a time, a little piece at a time. Ultimately, we end up with a significant amount of debt that I'm trying to get a handle on now. what that's going to be, how we're going to pay it off, and what the return on investment for all these things is. Because we've not really talked about this in terms of cost-benefit analysis, just that it will be nice when it's done. And that's, I'm trying to now figure out whether or not, if we can even cover this debt, is really what I'm looking for. And that's really it. I think Chesapeake TIF comes and pays how much money a year? What do we take in?
About 600,000 a year.
Okay. And with this 4.7, let's just assume you've got the numbers there. Where are we at?
Yes,
What's
we
it
were
gonna take?
anticipating the TIF would collect about close to $12 million for the life of the TIF.
Let's talk about every year, because we have to pay for it every year, and every year we don't have the money for it. We have to figure out where to take it from to pay, correct?
No, that's
It's just
not
done.
true. It's not a general obligation
That's good,
bond,
then they lose.
Right.
right?
Then they lose.
It's a revenue bond, so it's
Okay.
strictly backed by revenues. It doesn't impact your general obligation capacity or
Okay,
anything.
which means investors are gonna ask the exact same question I'm asking. And as the investors, if they're not any more satisfied than I am, either we end up paying more interest because it's a riskier bond, or we end up in a different problem that we don't wanna get into, is what I would suggest. So that's what I'm looking for, something that makes me believe that our homework is done, that the return on investment on this is sufficient, that investors will buy in at 3.5%, as opposed to demanding 6.5%, as we have on this currently to be authorized. That's what I'm looking for, what you're,
And a lot of that, like I said, the Squires, Patton Boggs, which is our bond counsel, prepares this ordinance, and that's a standard language we've used on every debt issue, the 6% that you've mentioned, and we can revisit that with them going forward to see if that's something, why are we using that? But that's something that we've kind of deferred to them as far as preparing that specific language. But I could tell you, with the recent issues that we've had, we've been nowhere near that percentage.
well, the recent issues represent the debt that we have now. The future issues represent the additional debt that we continue to garner. And so, we're going from 4.7 now, and then you're adding on further, which means it's possibly less desirable, since the payback from the TIF is simply $600,000. And you're borrowing enough money for multiple projects and then telling me that Squires and Dempsey are going to figure out later whether or not this is really a good buy, a good investment grade bond or not.
Like I said, you won't know until you go.
Lastly, what has I couldn't find minutes to the Finance Committee. What was the Finance Committee's discussion and approval? Did they approve this?
Not this specific issue. I mean, it's been talked about, I think, informally, but that's not their role, I don't believe, as far as approving debt, so.
Mr. Chairman, I'm finished. I don't have any more questions. The Finance Committee has not voted and approved of this mechanism. And I've outlined all my concerns and things that just seem to be unanswered questions, and I don't want to go forward dealing with this, so I'm done. Thank you. It's left for the rest of you guys.
All right, so let me point out a couple of things. First of all, it's for the market to figure out these risks and what they're going to demand in terms of an interest rate. We've been very successful in going to market lately. TIF bonds are snapped up on a regular basis. This is a prelude to that. This is a note that would then be swapped out by a TIF bond, and as Mr. Soloway indicated, that is not a general revenue bond, and that is not anything that interferes with our ability to provide any other goods and services that are needed throughout the city. It is limited to that. And TIFs are very complicated. Boy, they just give me a headache when the first time I approached them. They still give me a headache. I've got to sit down with Mr. Soloway and go through them, and he makes himself available anytime anybody has a question about, whether these are appropriate. He's assured me that we have more than adequate capacity to be able to issue these bonds and quite a lot of other TIF bonds, frankly, because there are more things coming down the road. But I'm very satisfied that this is good investment for the community. It is important to think of in terms of return on investment, but return on investment means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. We were looking at the front page of the Plain Dealer earlier, and part of the reason Sandusky is experiencing a resurgence is because we are making the kind of investments to cause people to want to live here. And then we get returns on investment that way over time, unpredictably, but we're in government, and we're in the business of taking those kinds of measured risks so that we can move our community forward. So I understand and appreciate the questions that you have. I'm quite comfortable with this legislation and intend to vote in favor of it. Additional questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, just
Lockhart.
to your point, I guess to Commissioner Poole's point, the return on investment, I'd like that to be a little bit more explained as to what we hope to achieve with it. I mean, obviously, we had something in mind, the staff had something in mind as to what we're going to get from spending quite a bit of money on this. We've taken, I don't know, maybe close to $1 million of community block grant money from the neighborhoods to put into these projects. What do we hope to achieve from that?
Well, Mr. Lasko, Mr. Whoopser, maybe ask you to take a crack at answering that. I mean, it's all the things that we've talked about, all the reasons that we, as a commission, have taken a vote to proceed with these projects. Today's question is a question of how we pay for the contractual obligations that we've undertaken. These bonds don't, this note and these bonds don't come as a surprise because that was in the original legislation. And I realize, people have different views about the appropriateness of this project. That's fine. We've had those votes, and now we go forward on the question of how it is we pay for these obligations that we have. I think this is a reasonable way to undertake those. Mr. Lasko or Mr. Whoopser, anything that you would care to add to that conversation?
Through the commission president, as to the CDBG allocation, I don't know if Matt wants to add anything specific, but it was that, my understanding, that was a reprogramming of the revolving loan fund. Yeah, the vast majority of our CDBG on an annual basis goes towards things like demolition and code enforcement or infrastructure projects that help fund road work throughout the entire city. We had a revolving loan fund that was unable to be used. In fact, it had been used maybe once in a decade or something, and because we'd really been proactive locally with the admissions tax dollars on Issue 8 in partnership with Cedar Point, we had created a local revenue stream that has helped to seed a great deal of investment. And you mentioned the Plain Dealer article from today that talks about $100 million being invested in the downtown alone and $300 million being invested throughout the city. A big part of the bicentennial vision plan, in which, again, this commission passed unanimously, the city planning commission passed unanimously, called for investments in the waterfront. They called for the competitive advantage of Sandusky in this globally competitive world being its natural resource of the waterfront, and use that as a tool to improve our quality of life and to create a climate in which people would invest here as to other places. And so through a variety of projects identified in that plan, including dusting off the Sandusky Pathway Plan and the revitalization of the Jackson Street Pier, we are making investments along the waterfront to attract investment, to improve quality of life for existing Sandusky residents, and to build on the fact that we are a tourism destination in ways that will allow us to improve the quality of life so that people want to do business and to live here. And I think the proof is in the investment that has followed in the past few years, and that investment has been made comfortable based in large part because this commission has stayed consistent in its commitment to those projects. And so ultimately, this is about the 8th time that we've debated this at this table, and I hope that we can maintain that consistency so that people can still feel comfortable continuing to make those investments in the city.
Thank you, Mr. Whoopser. Additional questions or comments, commissioners?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Lloyd.
I appreciate Mr. Pool's concerns. I did take the time I've met with Eric and with Mr. Soloway multiple times, and we've gone through the debt schedule line by line, seeing where everything's dropping off, what we can actually handle for the city of our size, and just making sure. One of the concerns that I've had is by following the capital improvement plan or the comprehensive plan, can we keep up with what the new projects that lie ahead? And I'm comfortable with this. I think we're right on track. So I'll be supporting this.
Additional questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman. just
Well,
one-
let me.
Unless somebody else
see-
wants to
Yeah, I
speak,
just
I'm
wanted to see. if
Mr.
someone-
Chairman.
Mr. Brady.
I think it's very difficult, if not impossible, to try to quantify a cost-benefit analysis. If you're trying to get to a dollar and cent number, you'll be chasing your tail for quite a long time doing that in a situation like this. The value are in the amenities that we're delivering to our residents in both of these improvements, whether it's Shoreline or Jackson Street Pier. Impossible to put a dollar and cent value on a cost-benefit analysis. The value that the people buying these bonds, the investors looking for these bonds, and the comfort level that they find will be in looking at the 200 condominium owners at the Chesapeake who are going to continue to pay their property taxes. They're going to continue to pay into this TIF. That is, for us, that is the goose that has laid the golden egg for both of these projects at this point in time. And I think it is incumbent upon us to make the most out of these TIF dollars, and making the most out of these is delivering this type of amenity to this city.
Additional questions or comments? Mr. Poole?
Just the last thing, just a couple comments. One, the cost-benefit analysis are pretty much done for almost any significant urban renewal project done in any city in the country. We can debate what the benefit is, but if you can't quantify it, then there's technically probably not much benefit financially to justify to spend the money. That's one. Additionally, I'm really very happy with probably 85% of what we've done, much of what we've done for over the last 4 years. I voted accordingly. I do think we have a responsibility to be very careful what we do with our money, because it's long-term matters. We will be making payments on this, as you can see, not just this first year, but for 30 years in the future. And that money is money that we no longer have. That money that's tied up in this TIF on one project or two projects in small amounts is tied up forever. It's as simple as that. And I would point out with regard to investment, we have attracted a small number of investors, a couple partners that are spending all the money, spending large amounts of money on multiple projects. It is not as though we have attracted 13 or 14 different developers knocking on our door, trying to build up any particular factory we've torn down and rehab the property, or any such thing, or developers building subdivisions, Coal Creek. We have a lot of things here that are not happening. Keller Building property, things of that nature. So it's okay to say, yes, I'm proud of what we've done, but let's not try and overstate about how much development we're getting when you consider it's not really a diverse group of folks. Now, individuals who we've given money to, and small businesses have spent money on it, people that run their businesses into some numbers, all of which is great. But this is not lots and lots of money flowing into this entire community. We've got a 4-block area where we're spending millions of dollars, and for which we're going to be in debt for a long time. So that's that. That's where I'm at on this, so, thank you.
Just a couple of things in response. I hope you didn't feel as though anyone was criticizing you. I think you're asking important questions. I think we come to different answers to those questions based upon the homework that we've done. But I would say that I think that we are into dozens, if not scores, of folks who have come in and made investments. Certainly some larger, some smaller. They're all important, and they're all adding to the fabric of our community and the dynamism of our local economy. And I think that that's where we're seeing the reward. That's just my own perspective.
Enough said.
All right, let's take a vote. Mr. Tabor, would you poll the commissioners on the motion first, please?
Mr. Waddington.
Yes.
Mr. Brady.
Yes.
Ms. Twine.
Yes.
Mr. Murray.
Yes.
Mr. Poole.
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd.
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart.
Yes.
And now on the legislation?
Mr. Waddington.
Yes.
Mr. Brady.
Yes.
Ms. Twine.
Yes.
Mr. Murray.
Yes.
Mr. Poole.
No.
Ms. Lloyd,
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart.
Yes.
That legislation is adopted. Item number 5, please.
Item number 5 is an ordinance be passed authorizing a cooperative agreement between the City of Sandusky and the Ohio Development Authority to finance the cost of design and construction for Shoreline Drive Rehabilitation Project, and declaring that this ordinance shall take effect, an immediate effect, in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Waddington.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
There's a motion and second. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Poole.
just describing the project. Where does this water line, what's it cover from what point in the,
Mr. Klein.
Through you, Mr. President, this water line is going from around Decatur Street all the way to the far east end of the project. And we're also adding water line based on the water main break July 4th last year. We're also adding water line up Wayne Street, that one block on Wayne Street. And we're going to be relocating the water line out from underneath Facer Park. It's an older water main that we want to make sure we handle now and put that under Hancock so that we don't have to tear up the park in the future. It doesn't blow under the park.
Additional questions or comments? Mr. Haber, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Mr. Waddington.
Yes.
Mr. Brady.
Yes.
Ms. Twine.
Yes.
Mr. Murray.
Yes.
Mr. Poole.
yes,
Ms. Lloyd.
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart.
Yes.
And now on the ordinance, please.
Mr. Waddington.
Yes.
Mr. Brady.
Yes.
Ms. Twine.
Yes.
Mr. Murray.
Yes.
Mr. Poole.
yes,
Ms. Lloyd.
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart.
Yes.
That ordinance is adopted. Item number 6, please.
Item number 6 is an ordinance be passed authorizing and directing the city manager to approve the second and final change order for work performed by Cash Services LLC of Millbourne, Ohio for the Cedar Point Water Main Improvement Project in the amount of $13,040.37, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Lloyd.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under the suspension of the rules and in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
It's been a motion and second. Discussion. Not then, Mr. Haber, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
yes,
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
yes,
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
That ordinance is adopted. Item number 7, please.
Item number 7 is requested an ordinance be passed authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into an agreement for professional property and easement acquisition services with O.R. Cullen Associates of Fairview Park, Ohio, and the West Side Utility, for the West Side Utility and Connectivity Improvements Project, and declaring this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Twine.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under the suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and second. Discussion. Hayberger, or maybe Mr. Klein, one of you could perhaps walk us through dealing with a lot of legal issues here, and you could explain what it is we're trying to accomplish and why it is we're taking this preliminary step.
Sir, Mr. President, so on these projects, when we're doing any type of infrastructure project, we need to make sure that we are doing the work in the right of way, or if there's an issue when we're going to install it, that we are getting the appropriate easements and acquisition. Sometimes you need to acquire the full property, sometimes you just need a sliver on the front along the right of way. In particular for this project, the West Side Utility and Connectivity Project, we're doing a lot of storm sewer work, a lot of water main work, and we're doing the bike path that would be along Venice Road on the north side, and we're doing a sidewalk on the south side for a portion of that as well in the heavily residential area. In addition, we're also doing water line and storm sewer work in the neighborhood off of Edgewater, south of Venice Road, which is Linden, Sagamore, that whole area down in there. What we found in going through this is that we need several sewer and water easements for this. Some of them are temporary, some of them are permanent. The temporary ones are designed just for during construction activities. The permanent ones will be that we have so we can maintain the infrastructure we're installing. One of them is in front of Toffs, for example. Others, we have infrastructure, catch basins and manholes that are actually outside on private property right now. So some of this is to demolish those structures and put the sewer infrastructure in the right of way to correct something that we may have made a mistake on in the past. So that's where the temporary and the permanent easements come from. I believe we have 5 of them on this project, and what we're looking for now is to be able to start negotiations with those property owners to make sure that we can acquire the property. So typically, after we go through this process, we'll do fair market value and then present an offer to each of the property owners based on the temporary or the permanent nature of that easement or encroachment or acquisition, whichever one we're going for, so.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Additional questions or comments, commissioners? Mr. Cresser, Mr. Haberger, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
That ordinance is adopted. Item number 8, our last regular item, please.
Item number 8 is an ordinance be passed authorizing and directing the city manager to purchase a Dell Power Edge server from Dell Marketing LP of Round Rock, Texas, through the State of Ohio Department of Administrative Services Cooperative Purchasing Program for the fire department, and declaring this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Twine?
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under the suspension of rules in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
There's been a motion and second. Discussion. Well, this is a 2011 server, still clunking around in 2019. There aren't too many businesses that would have an important computer like that is that old. Mr. Hamilton, I'm hopeful that we're getting closer to the point, I know we're getting closer, I just don't know how close we are to the point where we're pretty well caught up on all these critical pieces of hardware so that we can maintain consistent, the delivery of consistent services throughout the community. I know you've been working away at it, and this is just one more thing that we need to do, so unless you have some additional comments.
Not almost there. This is the last main server. We need to replace it, get the core infrastructure up to date,
Okay.
outside of the plans.
Mr. Miko, anything from the fire department?
We just want it to work all the time, if they have any problems.
Not asking too much.
Director Hamilton is the expert on why it's lagging behind.
Okay, all right, good. No questions or comments, commissioners? Mr. Haberger, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd? Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Ordinance is adopted, and we now turn the meeting over to Mr. Lipser for his city manager's report.
Thank you, Commission President, Commissioners, audience, and staff. I'll start with the donations. First, a donation of $10,000 was received from the City of Vermillion, and a donation of $7,500 was received from Vermillion Community Services, Inc. for transit operations for CY, what is the calendar year, 2019, sorry. I'd ask for a motion to approve that donation.
So moved.
Second.
It's been a motion and second. Discussion? We really do appreciate our cooperative relationship with Huron in providing funding for their residents so that we are able to extend
Vermillion.
service. I mean, Vermillion, what did I say?
Huron.
Oh, Huron, I meant Vermillion.
Next year.
Yeah, and that's great. We continue to invite the county to partner with us more on Sandusky Transit and perhaps finding a better way to provide funding and extend service throughout the entire county. But we're happy to have this partnership with Vermillion.
Absolutely.
So unless there are further comments, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Moving on, the Sandusky Recreation, Police, and Fire Departments received a $3,500 grant from the Whiteman Weaver Charitable Foundation to purchase pedal cars for this year's Safety Town. The city partners with Firelands Regional Medical Center to produce the two-day event on July 20th and 27th at 222 Meg Street. The event is moving to this location after several years at Dorn Park. The funds will purchase approximately 15 new pedal cars to replace the worn-out cars previously used for the program. I'd ask for a motion to accept that donation.
So moved.
There's been a motion and second. Discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries with our thanks.
Moving on to new and old business with finance. The next scheduled finance committee meeting is Friday, June 21st, 2018 at 8 a.m. for Public Works. We'd like to welcome our new assistant city engineer, Josh Snyder, who's joining us from Norwalk. Aaron, did you want to say a few words about Josh?
I'd love to. Josh, as many of you already know, Josh, he returns after being with the city for 9 years, between 1999 and 2008, when he was a traffic engineer right out of college. For the last 11 years, he's been the Public Works Director in Norwalk, where he did $4.5 million lift stations, fire station, electronic mapping, GIS, did a lot of work for them. Now, our office, I was going through the projects in the capital plan earlier, and with 48 projects listed in 2019, we are very excited to make sure that we have somebody with Josh's talent and caliber and knowledge and, everything to help support all those projects. Now, we don't necessarily get to give everybody a badge like police and fire do, but I did get Josh a pocket protector.
That's pretty good.
Well done. 30 years ago.
Great.
Yeah.
Probably already has a few, but
Ms. Snyder, based upon your accomplishments, it's a real coup for us to be able to have you join the city and welcome aboard. And thanks for saying yes and having that conversation with Aaron. So we look forward to your good work, adding to all the rest of the huge volume of work that department is doing. So thank you.
wonderful. Moving on, the Huron Park and Lions Park splash pads were made operational in time for Memorial Day weekend. The 2018 water quality report has been distributed. Big Island Waterworks continues to meet and exceed all established drinking water standards. Please refer to the city's website for more info. Water Services staff will begin another round of meter upgrades throughout the city starting in June. Affected property owners will be notified via door hangers, and details of locations will be available on the city's website soon. A special thanks to all who helped with the Pipe Creek Wildlife Area Kiwanis Park cleanup on May 18th. Over 1,000 pounds of trash and debris were collected during the 2-hour event, and mulch was laid to create additional access for non-motorized watercraft from the Kiwanis side of the wildlife area. In planning, a neighborhood cleanup was held on May 25th and started at Churchwell Park. The next cleanup is scheduled for the city underpass on June 15th. All city underpasses, I should say, on June 15th. The regular Board of Zoning Appeals meeting will be scheduled for Thursday, June 20th at 4:30 p.m. in the Commission Chambers. The Landmark Commission is scheduled for Wednesday, June 19th at 4:30 p.m. also in the Commission Chambers. And the regular Arts and Culture Commission meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, June 18th at 5 p.m. also in the Commission Chambers. The regular Planning Commission meeting is scheduled Wednesday, June 26th at 4:30 p.m. And this is a new first-time announcement. Will be held at the new City Hall at 240 Columbus Avenue. So that gives me great pride to say that for the first time. For recreation, Tom Ritzenthaler and Tyler Truman will resume their volunteer work on the pump track at the skate park on Wednesday and Thursday, May 29th and 30th. A huge thank you is due to the many local businesses who have provided support for the project up to this point, including Toughman Equipment and Supply, Hanson Aggregates, Messenberg Brothers Trucking, Tom Ritz Designs, Pump Tracks USA, Erie Materials, and Mona Pizza Gourmet. The pump track should be available for use by Friday, and the Recreation Department is planning a grand opening on National Skate Park Day on Friday, June 21st, starting at 11 a.m. Also, the Sandusky Rec Department would like to thank the following local businesses for their sponsorship of our T-ball coach pitch teams: The Colonnade, Erie County Community Foundation, Pizza House East, Firelands Regional Medical Center, O Taco, and Tom's Trophy Shop. Games are played Tuesdays and Thursdays at Dorn Park, with the season wrapping up in early June. That concludes my remarks for this evening. Thank you.
What's your questions or comments, Mr. Manager?
Just one, regarding the splash pads, do we have some mechanism for conserving water on those as opposed to running continuously when there's nobody there? Or is there
Aaron, did
something
you want to
we do
speak to
about
that?
it?
Through you, Mr. President. The splash pads do have the alarms, the motion detectors, the motion sensors out there. There's is it the push button that's out there? That they can turn it on and it'll go off. So that was something that I believe we didn't have that at Huron a couple years ago. And it was something that that big shed that's out there now, we have better controls, we have better equipment that's allowing it to go on and off with its use rather than just staying on. We were actually bringing staff in every Saturday morning, every Saturday night, every Sunday morning, every Sunday night to turn it on and off. So staff was extremely excited to make sure that they could have their weekends off.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Waterman.
Yes, City Manager. Are we gonna have a portable one again at Churchill Park this summer, like we did last year, a small?
I'd have to look to, I believe that we are. I know that Talon is working with Public Works to get the line run, so, yeah, the question is yes.
That worked out pretty good last summer, so, yes, thank you.
Additional questions or comments for the city manager? Then we'll turn to old business. Any items of old business? Any items of new business?
Mr. Chairman, I went to the Regional Planning Commission meeting on the Route 6 corridor planning study, and they offered an option on Cleveland Road for the bike path, that rather than what we're looking at now that runs back along Cleveland Road through the properties on the back side of the harbor, I should say the front side of the harbor, to run directly along Cleveland Road, which, for whatever reason, seems like it might be worth at least investigating before we get any more money, any more invested in. And all the running through private property and dealing with trying to get easements and then trying to run a bridge across Pipe Creek at the point that we're looking at now looks quite costly. And I suppose if you want, I can make a motion that directs that we at least investigate it and give us an idea whether or not which is more cost effective.
It'll be okay if I got some feedback from staff?
Absolutely, feedback, absolutely.
So, Ms. Byington, if I'm remembering correctly, and I'm trying to get I haven't seen the map that Mr. Poole is referring to, but if I remember correctly, that was an alternate plan in terms of how to bring the bike path around. And I think but I may not be remembering that right. Can you speak to this issue that Commissioner Poole is raising?
Through you, Mr. President, and correct me, Director Klein, if I'm wrong, I think that the primary route is to use the old pier track that goes in front of the harbor and then to cross over. The Cleveland Road was a secondary option.
That's what I thought was an alternative.
Yes.
And we had not yet made the decision. I don't know, what's the decision-making path and timeline for deciding whether to go with the initial plan or the alternate Cleveland Road plan?
Through you, Mr. President, I'll pass it over to Director Klein because he's working with the consultant on the final plans.
Under the Landing Park project, when that was laid out, under the conceptual portion, it showed the path going down the pier track and crossing just behind Castaway Bay, just to the north of Castaway Bay, and then connecting just to the north of the city's lift station over there. And that's the route that we are taking right now. We're proceeding with that. The consultant has already reached out and started talking to property owners, and they're starting to go through the easement and acquisition stage of that portion of it. It wasn't really something that we looked at to go along Cleveland Road as part of this project, because the direction was always that was the primary option. If we could get the primary option, then we would go that route. What I would say too, to add to Director Byington's comments, is that when we were looking at it in the past, we were looking at it as two different things. One being a recreational route versus more of a commuter route. And the portion along Cleveland Road, along Route 6, even when we looked at it going from the city to Huron, there were two routes, one of them being a commuter route and one of them being a recreational route. And that's the reason why that pier track was so, was brought to the top a lot more quickly, because it was a recreational activity. That's what we were gearing it for, was more that recreational aspect. And along, excuse me, along the same path, so to speak, was we were not, we saw that the bridge was there just north on Route 6 that's already on Pipe Creek. We were looking at that bridge, that existing bridge, and we were looking to see if we could save money, because the most expensive part is the new structure that would go over that area on Pipe Creek. But that bridge is not wide enough to accommodate bicycles or multi-use paths, so we would have to remove that bridge and put up another bridge. We'd have to take away some parking in front of Castaway Bay to make sure that the bike route worked. So there were a lot of hurdles in both directions with acquisition and needing to do that, but we did not look and do necessarily a detailed cost analysis about which one was a better option, because we were looking more at that recreational aspect.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, essentially, I'm simply asking that we actually look at this. I have ridden bicycle in probably 10 states, including Chicago. It's all recreational. Calling along the road commercial or commuting versus recreational, that makes a difference. I'm not sure that it does for the actual bicycle riders. We're talking about a half a mile. So the cost of this, and if the homeowners decide, we'll have a lot of money tied up in paying consultants to argue and or dicker with homeowners about rights to the pier track. And I'm not sure that we shouldn't at least identify how much money it's gonna cost it, and is it really worth the effort? Not to mention, I'm really not even sure how you're bridging Pipe Creek at any kind of reasonable cost. The existing bridge that he's talking about, near Pipe Creek, I've ridden my bicycle across it, so you can't cross. If you wanna have two lanes, you just simply, you could add a lane to it. Whether you have to tear it down or not, ODOT at the meeting acknowledged that it would be simple enough, I shouldn't say simple enough, I don't wanna mischaracterize it, that an option is to at the minimum widen it. And it's probably about 150, 200 feet, if that, as opposed to the gap going across the pier track is pretty significant, and I imagine building, maybe I don't understand, you are going to build a complete bridge across that, that has to be tall enough and high enough to allow traffic. We currently already have a bridge at Pipe Creek on Cleveland Road, and we're asking to put a single lane at the most to meet, and it's really to meet ODOT's requirements, which they've, if they've recommended, I shouldn't say recommended, if they've offered it as an option, they obviously have figured that it can be done. So, again, why don't I just make a motion that we simply study both and bring us a analysis of each, and we can decide which one is best for the community. That's my motion.
Second.
Then a motion and second, discussion.
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Brady.
Mr. Klein, how far downstream are the people we've hired to put this together? How far downstream are they now?
Through Mr. President, we're working on receiving the 70% design plans over the next month.
So this is well downstream and in the works. Thank you.
Additional questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure what a 7% design plan means.
70%.
70% design plan. Then you can give us the approximate cost then already, 70%? Cost to say the bridge going across Pipe Creek, just for example. So I'm only asking for a comparison. Obviously, ODOT has started on Cleveland Road. So I'm only looking to see what is the difference.
Well, there's a motion and a second. Additional comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lockhart?
is there a preference the engineer has on the,
Mr. Klein?
I guess, to me, if you're looking at it as a personal preference, or you're looking at it as an engineering preference, I mean, personally, I would much rather use the route that is being designed right now, because, I mean, riding along the traffic, while some people that are more experienced with cycling are comfortable with that, other people like me, if I had my kids out there, I'd be terrified. I would not want them riding along Cleveland Road, especially at 10 o'clock in the morning or any time at night. Now, yeah, you could do protected bike lanes, you could move people off the road, and you could do those types of things, but you still have to acquire all of that property because, I mean, yeah, the poles are, there's some space between the edge of pavement and the poles, but there's still quite a bit of property that would need to be acquired from those exact same, almost the exact same property owners. Yeah, you have Hidden Harbor, but the ones that front on Cleveland Road, a lot of them go all the way back to that same area. So it's, I mean, personally, I would prefer to take that route. As an engineer, you can't just add a lane to a bridge. There was never a structural analysis that was done of that bridge that was out there. So you'd have to actually figure out if that bridge could take the additional load. You'd have to put a cantilever off of the end of the bridge. I mean, it's just, I don't know the cost it would be to expand that bridge, to widen that bridge, to cantilever off of it, but I can say that, you know, I do have the costs for the estimates for the current bridge that I can get, but we're still in discussions as well with property owners in that area and that type of stuff to figure out exactly where we're gonna have the approaches.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second. Further discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Lloyd?
to do a cost analysis on the Cleveland Road or commuter pathway, how much would that cost? Something, would we have to go to the consultant, or is that something we can do in-house?
I would have to hire a consultant to go through that analysis. They'd have to do a load rating of the bridge, figure out what exactly would need to be done to expand the bridge and take that additional traffic. I would estimate that I would probably have to come back here for something over $10,000 to do just an analysis of the existing bridge. And I would almost guarantee that the recommendation would be to demolish that bridge and put a new one up.
Well, I would say we're a little bit too far down that creek. So, Mr. Cresser, Mr. Haber, would you, I don't need to ask that. So all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
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 The motion fails. Other items of old business. I'm sorry, we're on new business. I had one that I wanted to raise, Commissioners. I shared with you all last week an email indicating I would be requesting a motion in support for this tonight. The Cedar Point is in the process of rebuilding much of the Cedar Point Road. And there is a concern among the residents that once that's finally smooth, it is a pretty rough street at the moment. They've made it a massive investment in the break wall that's out there. If you haven't seen it, it's really quite something. But they're going to repave the road at some point in time, and the Cedar Point Property Owners Association has expressed a desire and support for speeding cameras. I realize in some communities, speeding cameras have been controversial, but this is a community, this is a neighborhood that's asking for it. And what they have asked is that we don't, adopt this throughout the city, just out there. I assume I'll be catching a lot of my relatives, and that will be fine. They can learn to go to the speed limit. But I would appreciate a motion to ask the law director to prepare legislation in due course so that we can take that for consideration.
So moved.
Second.
There's motion and second, discussion. All in favor, Mr. Poole, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Just a question about two things, several things. One, we have, there's 5 pieces of legislation, no, the 3 that I know of at the state that suggest that they're trying to limit and/or penalize communities that do this. I recognize that you have said to make this revenue neutral, which indicates that, according to what you wrote, we will collect fines until it pays for the investment. First of all, we don't have anything, after you pay for the investment, then what? You're allowed to speed? The concept here is, I think we should be asking the staff to identify the speeding problem and provide us solutions to it. The idea of legislators just coming up off the top of their head with a solution to a problem that, first of all, we haven't even identified. The last I heard, the residents I've spoken to there suggest that the problem is that the traffic is backed up during Cedar Point season. And so I'm really confused about who the speeders are. And if the chief hasn't provided us with the data, because we do have a device that tracks speed and can tell us exactly how many speeders are out there, what time they're doing it. This may be resolvable without us having to end up in court and getting sued by people that don't choose to object to being caught on camera. I'm not opposed at all that if this is the solution the staff comes up with, but I don't think it's wise for us to enter into this without even identifying what the problem is. The police haven't spent any time out there writing tickets at all, and I just suggest that maybe you have the votes to push this through, and I'll vote yes if the rest of you do, but I don't think it's that good of an idea. We should be identifying the problem, getting solutions, possible solutions, and then deciding on what to do.
So let me add a couple more thoughts to that. The association has been discussing this for some time, so it's not something they came to willy-nilly. And I completely agree. If we were at the early stages of speeding camera legislation in the state of Ohio, then I would say it's not worth it. I don't want to get involved in extra litigation. If Cleveland wants to litigate that, or Toledo wants to litigate that, fine, go ahead. They have. And the Ohio Supreme Court has said, Charter City, you have a right to do it. And General Assembly tried to say you can't do it, and the Ohio Supreme Court said, no, that's Charter City's right. You've got the right to do that. And as long as you do it in a way that affords due process. So some communities just sent you a bill. You have to have the right to come in and challenge it. And so, that's been worked out in the case law too. So I completely agree with that sentiment that we shouldn't be on the bleeding edge of this issue. I think at this point it's pretty well settled law. The other thing I wanted to make sure that I mentioned, because I didn't before, you're right, it would be, my hope is it would be revenue neutral. How those fines get adjusted, I think, is something that's going to have to be worked out as the legislation is drafted. I don't know what that mechanism is. I assume it's a process of setting them lower if we have an excess fund for the next year or going forward. I don't know what that process would be at this point in time. And I also want to mention that it does have Cedar Point's, the amusement parks, support for the safety of their visitors and the residents and their employees.
Guess we'll give it a try.
Okay, we'll see. I'll just get it in draft. That's all I want to do is get a draft and see what it looks like and see what kind of comments we get. Further discussion on the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Other items of new business. And we'll turn to audience participation. Anyone wishing to address the commission on any items of city business, please step to the microphone, give us your name and address, and share with us your thoughts. Seeing no one moving to the podium, would someone care to make a motion to adjourn?
Wait, we got one other thing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, you even gave me a note, and I forgot to read the note. I didn't have my glasses on. So, thank you. We need to set a public hearing on July 8th to hear a petition for a vacation of a 20-foot alley located between 1643 and 1649 Cleveland Road. Would someone care to make a motion to set that hearing?
Second.
Motion and second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is set. We stand adjourned.